Have you ever dreamed of birding amidst Ecuador's lush cloud forest, surrounded by dazzling hummingbirds and elusive antpittas? If so, you won't want to miss this special webinar featuring world-renowned ornithologist and field guide author Paul Greenfield. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, how you doing?
Paul has spent decades studying Ecuador's extraordinary bird life, and in this exclusive event, he'll introduce us to two unforgettable tours, one through the avian-rich landscapes of Southern Ecuador, and another into the biodiverse treasures of the Northwest Andes. Whether you're an experienced birder or new to the world of tropical birding, Paul's insight and firsthand knowledge will bring these destinations to life. Get ready to explore breathtaking habitats from Paramo highlands to Amazonian foothills and hear about the iconic species that make Ecuador a top birding destination. Let's dive right into the details with this exciting tour and find out which adventure is calling your name. Now, we'll turn to Paul's presentation.
Welcome to Ecuador. Today I'm going to highlight two events Ecuador tours. But for those who are unfamiliar with this wonderful country, I'd like to begin with a brief intro. Check out the little red shape that's in that upper left-hand corner of South America, and there are some little red dots that you might be able to see. That's Ecuador and its Galapagos Islands. And you can notice that on the world stage, Ecuador seems pretty insignificant. It's pretty darn small, but, well, it's just not insignificant. With only about 5/100ths of the world's mass, it incredibly holds 10% of the world's total biodiversity. So you're looking at a really little spot that holds quite a lot. Okay, so here we're looking at South America. We're enlarging our view now to zooming in on Ecuador, and you can see that little tiny country, which is about 1.5% of all of South America. So it's pretty small. Ecuador is the fourth avian-rich country in the world. It covers, it holds about 1/2 of the birds in South America. So being that small, it's pretty rich. The richest countries in South America in birds are Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. And the difference in numbers between Ecuador, which is less than 1/4 the size of Colombia, or less than 1/4 the size of Peru, and of course a tiny percent of the size of Brazil, is just maybe 250 to maybe maximum 300 species difference. And you can see in the difference in its size, it's pretty amazing. That's 18% or about 1/6 of the world's birds in this tiny little country. So if you can keep your remember that big world map as we talk about it, it's just pretty amazing. And that's like combining, as you can see on the screen, combining North America and Europe together in terms of the number of bird species. So it's pretty darn rich. Here's sort of a comparison with the state of Colorado. Ecuador is just slightly larger than the state of Colorado. And again, it holds double the species of all of North America. Here we come a little bit closer, and we're going to get a little picture of Ecuador and the two tours that we're leading. The one in the Northwest, you can see, is quite a small trip. It doesn't cover very much area. And the one in the South is larger. If you can notice, there's a little sort of a paler line running north-south down there. That's the Andes. And the Andes divides the Pacific coastal plain from the Amazon basin, which is on the east, Pacific coastal plain on the west. And of course, Galapagos Island, you can sort of see sticking there off on the left, which is about 600 miles out in the Pacific Ocean. Ecuador has about 10 endemic EBAs, endemic bird areas, and the two richest EBAs in the world are the Chocó, which is in that northwest area you can see up in the left, and the Tumbesian area that runs into Peru, which is in the south. And both of our tours will have something to do with them. We will be seeing the Choco bioregion species, the ecoregion species, or the EBA species, and a few of in the northern tour, a few of the species that are found in the Marañón, in the Tumbesian region. And in the southern trip, we will have a chance to see some of the Choco species on the west slope. And of course, these, if you can see in green, the different EBAs that exist in Ecuador, that Ecuador has something to do with. And we will be seeing representatives of all of those. So let's start. Let's just take a look at avian jewels of the Northwest. I'm going to start in the north. That's the shorter tour. This is, I like to consider it as the gateway of Ecuador, because it has this northwestern area was really the first that developed for birding in Ecuador, and it has the widespread infrastructure and a tremendous amount of local involvement in the birds, and so it's pretty good, and the area is quite something. You see a little bit of the photographs of the area that we're looking at. We will be going down the west slope of the Andes, and it is mostly humid rainforest, montane rainforest from the temperate zone all the way down to the lowlands. Okay, we're talking about here, this is an 8 field day trip, and we stay at 2 separate lodges. Our first destination, of course, is going to be Séptimo Paraíso. And this is a lodge in the Mindo Valley. Mindo was a very small village. It has now become a real center for tourism, and it's got lots of hotels. When I first visited that area, there wasn't a single hotel or a single restaurant. And so now it's a big deal, and there's forests nearby, and the area we'll be staying at. This will be our base of operations for about 4 days. We will be visiting several separate areas in relation to staying at Séptimo Paraíso. You can see the first 3 on this list: Yanacocha Reserve, Pachaquindi Reserve, and Bella Vista Cloud Forest Reserve and Lodge. Those are the areas that we will be visiting on the day driving down, our first day driving down towards Séptimo Paraíso. Yanacocha is a very high elevation area. It's about 3,600 meters, it's over 11,000 feet, very high temperate zone. It is owned and run by the Hokotoco Foundation. This is a foundation. I was one of the founders of that foundation that purchases large tracts of land to try to protect specific species that basically don't fall under government protection areas. And then we will be making 2 separate stops. So this is going to be our first sort of introduction to hummingbirds. And then you can see in green down below several other areas. And on the 3.5 days that we will be at, it's basically 4 full days planned, but 3.5 days we will be birding in that area. We'll be visiting several areas. And the really nice thing about this West Slope area and this tour is that there are many, and I would say almost every day, a new local birding garden or some endeavor by a community opens up, and there's always the opportunity. We'll get news that a really good species was found in one place or the other, and we'll be visiting all of them. A few of them that are really, really interesting of these that are on this list. Amagusa Reserve is owned and run by a family of husband and wife, and now their children are sort of involved. And it started as just a place right next to a very large sort of boutique hotel that has a lot of forest. And they started feeding birds, and now it is a must-see for almost anybody who ever comes to the West Slope of Ecuador, and everybody goes there, and it's quite fantastic. And so we'll be going there, lots of hummingbirds and tanagers and all sorts of things. And then Refugio Paz de las Aves is owned and run by Rodrigo Paz and his brother, Angel Paz and his brother Rodrigo, the two brothers that have sort of revolutionized finding species like antpittas. They have a cock of the rocklet there, and they talk to the birds, basically. And they've started sort of a revolution all over the world to find where people can actually see some of these species that are so difficult. We'll look at that to see a little bit more of that in a while. And there's always a chance, of course, that we'll make some unscheduled stops depending on the birds, depending on timing, depending on what we've seen and what we need to see. The next stop on the day that we finish with our first 4 days at Septimo Paraíso, we are going to drive a very short distance to Capari Lodge. And Capari is fairly new addition to this tour's itinerary. It's quite a pleasant area, slightly lower in elevation. Septimo Paraíso is at about 1,500 meters. That's about 5,000 feet elevation. And Capari Lodge is just under 1,000 meters, which is around 3,000 feet in elevation. And so the species around the lodge, many, some are the same, but there are quite a few differences. And it overlooks the Rio Blanco. You can see in that one of the lower slides there. And logistically, it works great because we can visit several areas that are a little further away from Septimo Paraíso. So we come here to be able to visit a few other areas. And we can see on the list here, Rio Silanchi Bird Sanctuary is the lowest elevation site we will visit on this itinerary. And this 23 of Junio is a wonderful sort of place. It's a tiny village, and one of the village residents is protecting an area above the village. We will drive a ways up and then have to walk some distance with the hopes of seeing long-wattled umbrella birds. And of course, there's a load of other stuff. They have hummingbird feeders up there and all sorts of things. So it's a pretty spectacular place, and it's quite close to Capari Lodge. And then Fruity Tour, which is a very interesting place. Another local landowner who, during the COVID pandemic, was basically in economic straits, having real problems. And he decided, I think he was looking on internet and saw somebody feeding birds, and he sort of got inspired to do that. And this is just another must-see place. He's developed it wonderfully, and he's got plantain bananas out for lots and lots of birds, and all sorts of things show up, and many, many hummingbirds, and some of the lower elevation species. Here you can see on the lower left this long-billed starthroat, which is one of the species you can see there. And there's just a load. So let's take a look at some of the species we're going to see. Obviously, on a conversation this short, I can't show everything, but we'll just show some of the highlights of the species that we might see on this Avian West Slopes tour. Plate-billed mountain toucan, that's a bird we will try to get on our first afternoon as we're driving down towards Septimo Paraíso. And if we, for some reason, miss it there, we have a chance. It's only about a half an hour drive to the area where we can see it on another afternoon or morning. Again, one of the nice things about this itinerary is we can be very flexible about where we go, how much time we spend at different places. On the right, this mossback tanager and the rose-faced parrot. The really easiest place to see those are at the Amagusa reserve that I mentioned. These species, which are difficult in many areas in Ecuador, are relatively easy to see in these at this reserve. Choco trogon is one of the Choco EBA species, Choco endemics. We can see this in several places actually, and that's one we'll be looking for, of course. Cloud forest pygmy owl. Can be around in a few places, but actually the best area is at Angel Paz, at the Refugio Paz. We often get that. But some more. We have this crested quetzal, also golden-headed quetzal. Both can be seen in the area of where this Western tour, fairly close to where our lodge is. And we could see crested quetzal possibly on the first afternoon also. Orange-breasted fruit eater, that's a species we can also see at Amagusa. That's pretty often seen. Actually, the woman and her husband who sort of will be walking around with us at times or whatever, they often call these birds in themselves with their own whistles. Toucan barbet, there are several places. This is a pretty spectacular Choco endemic, and this one we have quite a few areas we can see it. They're also at on the property of Séptimo Paraíso. This next one, banded ground cuckoo, is tough. I put it in there because it's a wonderful bird, and we will be at least 3, maybe 4 sites where we could see this species, but it certainly is not something we can expect. Lanceolated monklet, that's a species we could see here at the Milpe Reserve, and we can also see it at Rio Selanche, which I'll show you a little bit later. We'll talk about that. And rufous-fronted wood quail, these again can be seen and often called in by antpittas. And of course, this whole area and Ecuador overall is a hummingbird heaven. There's no 2 ways about it. And as I put up here, you can actually see 40 species in a day coming down the west slope. I don't expect that we're going to want to do that because that means too much running. But we can, I would say, easily see 25 to 30. And starting, of course, at Yanacocha Reserve, which is at that high elevation where we can see this sword-billed hummingbird on the lower right. And that's a bird we'll be looking for there. And the other one at Yanacocha, which is very rare, and that's another one which it's there, but it's really hard to expect it, is this black-breasted puffleg, which is the 3rd one on the upper row. And then, of course, the other 3, this velvet purple cornet, white-booted racket-tail, and Empress Brilliant, can all be seen in the Mindo area, in the area that will be from our hotel. They can be on our hotel grounds, at the feeders there, or maybe at least 3 or 4 places that we will be visiting. And these are all pretty spectacular species. Empress Brilliant especially is one that away from feeders, hardly anyone gets to see. And we may have a chance to see it in a couple of places, at least 2. And of course, more hummingbirds. I can't show the 30 or 40 that we might be seeing, but here are just some. This wonderful violet-tailed sylph is one that we could see anywhere from our hotel grounds to a couple of places in the lower areas. Crowned wood nymph would be at the Milpe Reserve and pretty regular there, and also around Capari. This great sapphire wing is the 2nd largest hummingbird in the world, and that's a species that we will hope to see at Yanacocha up in the high elevation, along with this golden-breasted puffleg down at the lower, in the middle, at the lower, the lowest row. And purple-bib white tip is another one in the Mindo area, either from our hotel grounds or some of the other sites. And shining sunbeam, another species that we will see at Yanacocha. This is when that species sits with his back to you. That's when you get all the flashing color. And then, of course, there are the tanagers. If you don't like hummingbirds, or even if you like hummingbirds, tanagers are also tremendous, and we're going to be seeing lots of them. We'll be going in the west again. There are a lot of these birding gardens where people set up feeders, either with papaya or plantain bananas, and we have a chance for seeing a lot of the species that are here. All of the ones, this barrel-spangled tanager is one we should see in the upper areas, especially on the day we're coming down, but we can see them in a couple of other places at Angel Paz, it's possible. This wonderful glistening green tanager and the rufous-throated tanager are easiest, and also this mossback tanager on the right, lower right. Those 3 are the easiest at the Amagusa Reserve, Mashpi Amagusa. Golden crown tanager is a beautiful, beautiful bird we will be looking for at Yanacocha. There, even though they do have plantain feeders and some tanagers come there, that's not one we usually expect at a plantain feeder, and we'll be looking for that in a mixed foraging flock. And of course, more tanagers. Can't get bored of tanagers. This black-chested mountain tanager is a very high elevation tanager found at somewhere around 11,000 feet in elevation, over 3,000 meters. And this one is one that we should see at Yanacocha. And another high elevation one is the buff-breasted mountain tanager, which is on the lower right of this screen. And that's another high elevation tanager we could see at Yanacocha. Golden tanager is quite common, as is black cap tanager. We should see them at various feeding stations around, especially around Séptimo Paraíso. And this blue cap tanager is one that we could easily see on our first afternoon, and also on our last afternoon in an area where they often come to feeders. And if you don't like color, we have some of these guys. All of these birds on this slide were photographed at Refugio Paz. And these are the ones that Angel Paz became world famous for. He talks to them, he calls them, he coaxes them out of their nests. He does all kinds of stuff in order to get to see them. We can't be guaranteed to see all of the antpittas that he ultimately offers. There are about 5 species of antpittas that he can be seen at his property and with him, and also this rufous-breasted ant thrush. In this Western tour, the avian species tour of the Northwest, there's a possibility of seeing 7 antpittas, which is pretty incredible. And so here's just a little recap of the itinerary of where we go, the different areas that we get to, where we stay. And of course, some of the birding sites are not on this, are not marked here. But so we would be leaving the hotel in Quito. We fly into the airport, and of course, we have to get to that hotel, which is about a 40-minute drive. And then, of course, we begin our birding. And our first area would be staying at Séptimo Paraíso and Capari Natural Lodge and that area. And then the birding can be from that area and further to the west. And here are the dates. We'll be looking at that again later. Okay, and then we're going to go to the southern hummingbirds and tanager extravaganza. And that, again, in the south, the southern Ecuador is geographically different from the north. The north is quite simple. We've got the Andes running up and separating the east and the west, very, very, pretty straightforward. And you just go up over the Andes. And so our western tour, we're just going from Quito. We climb to the crest of the western slope of the Andes and then bird down the west slope. The southern tour covers a much broader area. The Andes begin to drop in elevation. There's only a very few areas of this high elevation Paramo, which is sort of a tundra-like, very cold region, about 4,000 meters above sea level, 12,500 feet above sea level. We'll be visiting one area on that itinerary, and then we'll be visiting areas going downslope. But there are lots of valleys in this region as the Andes drop, and lots of crests and valleys, and all of the valleys vary in, some of them are dry, some of them are humid, some of them are, very wet. And then the slopes going down to the east, we also will be visiting, going down the east slope to the Amazonian foothills. And that's sort of, completely different area, of course, than we would visit on the northern trip, which we do not touch the east slope of the Andes. And so we cover, the Andean highlands, the Amazon foothills, and the west slope foothills, which covers the Tumbesian and Choco bioregions or ecoregions, these EBAs that we were talking about. So there's quite a diversity of species, but one of the things that is just a reality on this trip is that there are some drives. And those drives, of course, with birding stops to break up the trip. And we'll be seeing species, of course, on these drives. But it's not as close, the sites are not as close to each other as on the west. Okay, and then you can see some of this ceiba tree on the left side, some of the wet forest on the lower right, and on the upper right. One from the upper one is from the east slope of the Andes, going down towards the Amazon, and the other one is on the west slope. So this is a 10 field day trip with 4 lodges that we'll be visiting. And what we basically take off from Quito. This trip has changed a bit. We used to fly to Guayaquil, and from Guayaquil beginning the tour. This tour now will be leaving from Quito, and we will be flying to the Andean city of Cuenca. From the day one, we will arrive at the airport in Cuenca. We'll be met by our transportation, and we will drive directly to Yaviucu Lagoon, which is an area, part of the El Cajas National Park. And we'll start our birding there. We'll have our morning to bird there, and then we will settle into our Hosteria dos Chorreras. And that's quite a spectacular hotel. And we'll see that. It's fairly high elevation. I think it's just under 11,000 feet in elevation, a little over 3,000 meters. We'll settle in. We'll have wonderful lunch, and then in the afternoon, somewhere around 3 o'clock, we'll head out again to the El Cajas National Park, to the upper area, to the Paramo zone, or that tundra-like zone, to go after several species. Up here, you can see in the upper right, the tit-like dacnus. That's a real specialty. There are only a few locations in Ecuador and Peru that species can be seen. And there's one that's just really close by. So it's cold. It can be cold and windy up there. We'll be bundling up and layering up to visit that area. And there are quite a few other species to be seen. And then from there, from that area, we're only staying one night at Dos Chorreras. And then we're going to have another long drive, leaving that area and driving south, first along a long ridge on the highlands to the city of Loja. And then from Loja, we're going to drop down the east slope of the Andes, and we'll be going into the Amazon basin, into the foothills of the Amazon basin. And sites that we will be visiting here, two of them, most of the birding at Copalinga, the Cabañas Ecológicas Copalinga, which is another Hocotoco Foundation protected area, and the lodge belonged to local landowners, a Belgian couple, and that was bought by the Hocotoco Foundation, is being run as a lodge. There you can see just one of the rooms, one of the cabins. And we will be visiting in our vehicle, this very short distance, to the Bambuscaro section of the Podocarpus National Park. This is about 900 meters. So this is, again, around 3,000 feet. This is lower elevation. It's a nice mix of some tropical, Amazonian, and foothill species that we'll be looking at. We'll also be taking probably a morning or probably an afternoon to check out the area of the town of Zamora, we'll be going through the town of Zamora to reach Copalinga. And from the town, there are several areas that we'll be seeing other species that we normally don't get to see at Copalinga Lodge. And Copalinga has some pretty spectacular stuff. We'll talk about that as I go on. On our day that we leave Copalinga, we're going to have 3 nights at Copalinga. On the final morning, we will have sort of an early breakfast because we have another drive, and we will be stopping at Las Fragancias Road. It's a rural road that has still some forests in some areas, and we'll be checking that for getting some of the species we might have missed at Copalinga. That's great for quite a few species. Sometimes we see Andean cock of the rock there, sometimes umbrella birds, several other things. And so we'll be birding that road, and from there going on. Also, if you can see at this lower middle slide, our dining area is open, and there are feeders out in front. So it kind of makes it difficult to eat in peace because you're always looking at the birds. The hummingbird feeders will be hopping, and they've got plantain feeders and all sorts of things come in. So it's pretty hard to just sort of concentrate on your food. And they've got nice gardens with a lot of flowering shrubs and stuff. We'll be looking for things like spangled coquette and wire-crested thorntail and some other things. And this is also an absolutely wonderful area for tanagers. Some of the lowland Amazonian tanagers and some of the foothill species. So the next we'll be driving. So after we leave Las Fragancias Road, we're going to be driving up towards Loja, and right past Loja, we're going to go through the city of Loja, which is a very pleasant little town, and we're going to be heading for Tapichalaca Reserve, but we're going to stop just a couple of kilometers outside of Loja. We drive off to the left and go uphill to the Cajanuma section of the same Podocarpus National Park. We were in the Bambuscaro section down in Copalinga. And here we're just going to stop for some birding and for lunch. We're going to have a box lunch and see what we can pick up there. It's a pretty fantastic area also. And I have some special species that we'll be looking for. And then we're going to head further south to Tapichalaca Reserve. And we're going to be spending basically one full day there. It's 2 nights there. And then we have the following day we're going to be leaving. On our second day in the afternoon, we're going to be dropping straight down from Tapichalaca. We're going to spend the morning on on a forest trail, especially looking for the bird here in the middle, the Hocotoco antpitta. They have a feeding station there, and hopefully we'll get to see that species. But the the birding on that trail is pretty spectacular. There's all sorts of species that are possible. And then in the afternoon, we'll be taking a drive very close. If you look on a map, you can't even see that. It looks like you're dropping straight down. It's like two places in the same spot. And we'll be sort of winding down this road. And as we go down, we drop in elevation, and quite a lot. And the species change by the minute. And this is fantastic for hummingbirds, but mainly for tanagers and a bunch of other things. We've had all sorts of stuff on this trail. And this gets us into the Marañón Valley, which is another one of those EBAs or endemic bird areas. And we'll be looking for some of the special species that are found there. So now to go a little further from there, from the day we leave Tapachalaca, we are going to take a long day. Again, we're going to drop down to the Catamayo Valley, which is an arid valley, which has several of the Tumbesian species that I mentioned. And we're going to be then dropping down the west slope again. We're going from the Andean highlands, and then we're going to be dropping down the west slope, driving sort of northwest to Buenaventura Reserve. And we're going to be staying there again 3 nights. The day we leave Buenaventura Reserve, we're going to go down to the coast briefly, and we're going to visit Puerto Gelí, and that's an area of wetlands, mangrove, and some dry forest. And so here at Buenaventura, you can see the photographs here. There's a big open patio, and there are hummingbird feeders and plantain feeders that we can be watching all the time. And there's just very entertaining hummingbird feeders, of course, and many, many species possible. And this photograph of this red masked parakeet did come into plantain feeders. And this is an area at night we can see possibly black and white owl, and it's a pretty spectacular area. We get chachalacas coming to the feeders. And this is a place the name of the lodge is called the Umbrella Bird Lodge. And this is an area where we have a chance of seeing the long-wattled umbrella bird. As I mentioned, on the northwestern tour, we also have that 23rd of June location for long-wattled umbrella bird. Nothing is, of course, promised, but we have a good chance for that species in either of the tours. And then, of course, we'll be going through 5 life zones, several in this southern tour, several of the EBAs that I mentioned, species from the high elevation area of the El Cajas National Park, Ecuadorian hill stars, one species we'll be looking for. Giant conebill is possible in the polylepis woodland that is in that area, in that high elevation area. And then in different areas going down into down to the lowland, especially on the east slope, we have a good chance for torrent duck on the rivers that will be going through these rapid rivers we'll be driving alongside of. There's a chance, it's not a very good chance either east, that northern trip on the northwest, or in the south, we have a chance for white-faced nunbird. That is not one that I would expect to see, but it's there, and we'll be certainly keeping our eyes out. And one of the hummingbirds that's pretty dominant in some of the areas is chestnut-breasted cornet. Moving along, a couple of the highland species, this barred fruit eater can be seen at the Cajanuma Reserve or at Tapachalaca, along with this gray-breasted mountain toucan. These 2 upper species, they're high elevation bird species. At Copalinga, 2 of the species, actually 3, I guess we can look for. Certainly there's a feeding station for gray tinamou, which is not a species you would normally see outside of having a feeder. It's really tough. It's a big tinamou, and it's a really tough bird to find, but they often get them to come in to this feeder there. One of the fairly common tanagers at their plantain feeders is this golden-eared tanager, a specialty of the eastern foothills. Pretty spectacular bird, and we'll get fantastic looks. And then fasciated tiger heron is always possible on these rapid rivers, and we'll always be looking for them. They're also possible on the west-northwest trip. And then one of the absolute specialties of Buenaventura is the El Oro parakeet, which I had the fortune of being among the members who discovered the species in 1980, and the only place to see it really in the world, I mean, if you really want to get it, is the Buenaventura Reserve. They have now put out nesting boxes in one area in the upper part of the reserve, and we'll be going there in hopes of seeing that species. And then, of course, more of the endemic species. Again, another picture of the Hokotoco antpitta, this golden plume parakeet on the lower left, or which these two can be seen either at, definitely at Tapachalaca was where we're going to be looking for them the most. This golden plume parakeet sometimes shows up at the Kahanuma Reserve also. This crazy violet-throated metaltail. It's a very simple little bird. It's got this tiny range only in the area of Cuenca, around the national park, between Yaviucu, that first location, and up at the park below the Paramo, and we'll be definitely looking for this species. It's got, if you see it on a world map, you can't even see its range. I mean, and if you look at the Ecuador map, it's just like basically a dot. And then, of course, this rainbow star frontlet is a species we could see in a couple of the higher areas, along with some of the others. This one, it's a pretty good place to look for it at the Kahanuma Reserve when we're up there. And white-necked parakeet is one that we will definitely be looking for at Copalinga and in the Bambuscaro part of the park. Again, a few of the other species. Very interestingly, the Buenaventura Reserve holds some of the species that are found in the Tumbesian EBA, but this clubwing manakin, which we have a really good chance to see it in the northwest, Buenaventura is a spectacular place to see it also and watch its crazy display. It sings with its wings. Its wings flip up over its back, and they move at 80 times a second to rub against each other and create a whistling sound. This collared antshrike we would be looking for on our way out of Tapachalaca and when we get into the Catamayo Valley, that drier valley that I mentioned. And there's a good chance for that species and several others. And of course, here's just another shot of long-wattled umbrella bird with its wattle more or less extended. And again, some of the other species of the Tumbesian region, which is the second richest endemic area on Earth. We have a good chance. Actually, a surprise on our last trip, we found this white-tailed jay in a place I'd never seen it before, and right in the Catamayo Valley that we will be leaving when we leave Tapachalaca. So we have a good chance for that. Possibilities for this black cowl saltator. And at Buenaventura, we'll be looking for this emerald-bellied or crowned wood nymph. This is a subspecies, or if you consider it a separate species, is very unique. In the northwest, we'll be looking at a different type of crowned wood nymph, which has a green bib and purple-blue belly. And this one is all green, and it's pretty spectacular. And they don't come to the feeders, but they come near the feeders. The females often come to the feeders at Buenaventura, but the males are at the flowers right around the feeders almost always. It'd be nice if one would just sit at the feeder, but they often just sit right out in the open like this one did. Okay, and here just to show you, these are golden-headed quetzal, which could be seen in the southern trip on the east slope, but it's pretty regular on the west, along with that crested quetzal. The two of them can be seen together, sometimes even in the same tree. Again, this velvet purple coronet, which we saw a little bit earlier. This is also can be seen at Buenaventura, so we get it for sure in the northwest, and we have a good chance for it also at Buenaventura. And then here, silver-throated tanager is in that northwestern trip. And so here's just a recap of the Southern Ecuador trip and the hummingbirds and the Southern Ecuador hummingbirds and tanager extravaganza. Some of the species again that we can see, and you have some of the information of the dates and price, especially on the 2025 trip. Again, here on the map, you can see we fly from Quito down to Cuenca, and then from Cuenca we do this crisscross going down the Andes, going to the east slope, and then off to the west slope, and then we fly out from the western lowlands along the coast, and we fly back to Quito for the flight home. And then here's the recap for the avian jewels of the Northwest Andes. Again, both of these tours will be led by me and Remigio Grefa, Remy, who is I've been working with, and we've been working with a sort of a new member of the Vent team, and he's fantastic. You guys will all get a kick out of him. He's from the Amazon basin. He was born and raised there, and he learned all his birding skills at Napa Wildlife Center, which is his family is involved with, which I worked on to create that location. That's another trip that we can talk about some other day. And you can see the dates and the pricing for the 2025 trip. And here are some of our special species and a recap, just to look at the itinerary and where we drive. So if you have any questions, in a second I'd be more than happy to answer any of the questions you have. And so I thank you very much for your attention. And you can see here we have coppery-chested jacamar and the rainbow-bearded thornbill, two species. We could see it in the coppery-chested jacamar on the southern hummingbird and tanager extravaganza, and rainbow-bearded thornbill could be seen at both. So thank you very much.
A great presentation, Paul. Thank you so much. We have a guest that's joined us. We have Vent CEO Barry Lyon.
Hi, Barry.
Thank you. Hi, Ben. Hi, Paul.
And I would like to ask the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat or the Q&A section in the toolbar. And I'll also mention that in the handout section is the itinerary from last year's departures. And I mistakenly put in last year's prices on the slides that you just saw. Patrick Swaggerty, the tour operations manager, will be updating the itineraries and the pricing shortly. So if you would like to have that updated pricing, please reach out to Patrick at ventbird.com. Carol says, very thorough. Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome.
Paul, let me ask you a little bit about the weather. You know, you were saying that there are a lot of weather changes in the North Tour. What can people expect for temperature ranges from the high to the low, from the hot to the cold?
Yeah, in general, both itineraries, you know, in a sense, we're going to be layering up and down as we go and as we move from place to place. There's in general, because of global warming and all of this, we can often be sort of missed at this time of year in November for the Northwest trip. It should be, you know, not very wet, and the temperatures, the coldest up at Yanacocha could be, you know, maybe get to around 50 where we would be birding, but it can be, you know, if it's rainier or, you know, you need to be warm. I sometimes, well, Remy freezes. He's from the Amazon, and he looks like he's, you know, going into the Antarctic or something when he dresses for this. But you know, for most of us, you know, just having a sweater underneath and a raincoat or something, and for much of the, you know, much of those areas will be pretty close to the van, so you can, you know, layer up or layer down if you need it. If this, you know, if it's, I wouldn't say sunny, but if it's a you know, fairly normal sort of overcast day, it's reasonable. And so, you know, in the 50s and maybe 60s in the coldest, and then the warmest, let's say midday, could get to 80 degrees. But again, we're on the equator. We're running along the equator, so the sun is pretty intense. You know, so at Rio Silanchi, which is the lower elevation, which is only still 400 meters, so it's not the real super lowlands. And it's often overcast there, so the weather isn't really that bad. It you know, if it might be 75, 80 as a max. And then, of course, these, you know, the southern trip has some of those same conditions.
Mark has a question here. Which tour has the most hummingbirds?
Well,
is that a trick question?
The absolute best one, it really has to do with the infrastructure that's available. In the South, there are 3 of the places we're going have great hummingbird feeders. 2 of them especially. One of them can vary because those chestnut-breasted cornets can also be bullies and chase a lot of things away. The northern trip by far has the most infrastructure, lots of feeding gardens, birding gardens that we call them, and we have the best chance to see most. In terms of number, if you count all the species possible, Southern Ecuador has more species. But in terms of the possibility of seeing them and seeing them really well, both of these trips are fantastic for photography. And of course, we work that out with the birders who don't want to do the photography. It usually goes pretty smoothly. But the hummingbird feeders and the vegetation around as the hummingbirds are waiting to move to the feeders are pretty spectacular for all of that. And the Northwest has also great tanager and other species feeders. In the southern trip, there are two basic, maybe three places where there are feeders for tanagers and other things like that. So both of them are great, and some of they have different species, and it really depends on what each person is looking for. I would say for somebody who has not been to Ecuador, the Northwest would be a great place to start. But I have had travelers who've come for their first trip to Southern Ecuador, and they have not regretted it. So
good. All right. Thank you for that. And Mark, thanks for that question. If you have more specific questions about what hummingbirds are available on these tours, we'd be happy to send you last year's field report or checklist of possible birds to see on that tour.
Yeah, and if there are any questions like that come after this webinar, and you have questions, either writing to Patrick, and Patrick can forward over to me. I'd be more than happy to answer any specifics that you may have.
Great, thanks, Paul. Leslie says that she took 2 trips with Paul and Remy, and that they were wonderful guides, and the birds we saw are amazing.
Yeah.
Larry says, good to see you. Hope to see you again in November.
Oh, great.
And Rosemary says, nice seeing you, Paul. We did a trip with you in December of 2008. Wonderful presentation.
Whoa, things have changed since 2008. They gotten better, shall we say.
Yeah, right. Barry, would you like to add anything to the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I would, as a matter of fact. I joined this presentation briefly here just because Ecuador is just such an amazing country for a variety of reasons, but particularly for the birds. And it just had me thinking about the fact that I was in Ecuador in June last year, and it had been a number of years since I had been there. And I was fortunate to travel with Paul for only a day, but we visited the northwestern slopes, and it was just a striking reminder, a stunning reminder, really, of how amazing the birding and the feeder shows really are. But there's also a larger point here too, is that what we have found here at Vent is that Ecuador has been in the news in recent years for not necessarily the best reasons. I know that some travelers hold concerns about travel to Ecuador regarding issues of safety and security because of some things that have occurred down on the coastal city of Guayaquil. But I know Paul could speak to this, and I'll ask Paul to speak to this point and address this. But I want to just convey my own experiences and other people I know in the travel industry. And despite whatever imagery people see in the news, Ecuador is a fantastic country to go to. It is perfectly safe. Pretty much anywhere you go in the country, people I know, we just feel completely secure in visiting Ecuador. And it's really kind of a shame what's happened, because in parts of the country, you have these wonderful birding lodges that are experiencing low occupancy because people are concerned about traveling to Ecuador. And I just can't tell you enough how unfortunate that is, because we love it. Vent loves Ecuador. We're fortunate that our Ecuador tour leader, Paul Greenfield, lives there. And we are moving ahead full steam with our programs in 25 and 26, including some new programs. So, Paul, I don't know if you'd like to add to that or not, but please chime in.
Sure. Yeah, well, basically we can go by what's been happening. Our tours have been, every single one has gone, problem free. The birding has been great. People are nervous. We can't negate that there are problems. There are problems in a lot of places in the world too. And bad news always travels farther and faster than good news. But just remembering Barry's visit with was we can't even say a day. I think we spent just a few hours together, and it rained at part of it. And I don't know how many hummingbirds we saw, and I don't know how many. We saw mountain toucan, and we saw toucan barbet, and we saw just about everything. Very, very, very quickly. And that northern trip, of course, everything is very, very close. And the southern trip is really excellent. We've made, this one change where we fly from Quito and directly to Cuenca. That drive from Guayaquil to Cuenca has been, wonderful. But since Guayaquil has been in the news a little too much, we've changed that so that, nobody will feel, nervous about that part of the trip. But Ecuador so far, and most of the trips, and not just me, because if it was only my experience, with a number of trips is one thing, but basically other tour companies that are working in Ecuador and friends of mine and colleagues who are out birding, it's birding as usual. It's business as usual in most of the country, and we are not anywhere near the areas that are really bad. And our lodges are basically out of the way places that nobody, we'd have no fear of anything happening.
Good. Thank you, Paul, for
Thanks,
that.
Paul. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Donna has a comment and a question. She says, "Hey, Paul, this is tempting to get us on the southern trip. Are you still doing the Napo trip?"
Well, if we get enough people to go to Napo, I do the Napo trip. Otherwise, Remy, who is born and raised at Napa Wildlife Center, he would do that if it's small numbers. But if it's a normal, few more people, and it's the most wonderful experience there is, really. And so anybody wants to do that trip, it's pretty spectacular.
And Tara says, "Very good. No, thank you for that information about the safety concerns and traveling to Ecuador."
Sure. It's great.
Well, I think that might be all the questions that we had. Paul, do you have any closing remarks, or Barry?
No. Okay. Yeah, we have Margaret just came in with a comment. Yeah. No, I think basically Ecuador is a spectacular little country, and birding is relatively easy. Most areas are fairly close by. The local communities have embraced birds and birding in a way that most other countries, you just don't see it the same way. And there are more and more, and as I said, it's almost daily. I'm constantly blown away. Every time I go down any of these places with our tours, we find out about something new. And we, certainly in the Northwest, and even in the Southern trip, if we have a chance to visit something, we get a little message or something that somebody just saw something in one of these little birding gardens that we didn't even consider visiting. We will often make changes to the itinerary to try to see something, and Ecuador is really spectacular that way. And some of the stories, it's not just the birding's fantastic and the birds are fantastic, but the stories of these local campesinos who have taken in birding and changed their lives completely. And it's really basically thanks to all of us, thanks to all of you that come down and bird in a lot of these countries. We're sort of showing people that there's something more than just, struggling all your life. And a lot of these local people are just making wonderful livings for their families and stuff because of birds. So we're all part of that.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us today for another event webinar. We hope you enjoyed this presentation, and we hope that you decide to go on one of these fantastic tours with Paul in the near future.
Thank you.
Oh.
Bye, everybody.